Good afternoon. Thank you all for attending today's Heirs Property panel. We're so honored to speak with you all and hear your stories about your experiences with heirs property and land loss. We're so grateful that you're here with us and are willing to share. I want to begin with each of our panelists telling us a little bit about their own personal experiences with heirs property. And Ms. Michelle and Ms. Trudie, I would like to begin with you. Can you tell us about your experiences with your property and land loss?
So hi, my name is Michelle Carthen. I'm here with my mother. She is the person that was most directly impacted by the forced share. My mom, as Adrian mentioned in the introduction, was born and raised in Louisiana on that land, and it was very dear and near to her heart. She left Louisiana to come here to work and really went back on a mission to make sure that the land stayed within our family, educating family members, et cetera. When she was forced to move from Louisiana back here, she's now just trying to adjust to life here in Washington, D.C. So I will turn it over to her to see if there's anything more that she wants to say or wants to add. Mom, she asked if you want to share your experience with the heirs property, like what's your experience? And this is an introduction. You have about 3 to 4 minutes.
Well, actually, the person that got the land set up at first, she did never live on the property. She lived in California. And somehow she got in contact with this family member in Louisiana, which she never lived here. And so that's how the ball started going. She was the first one to sell her portion to this family. I was his family. And but she never lived here. She only knew it through her father, everything like that, which was my uncle, my mother's brother. And somehow something got messed up. Then we had another family member in Chicago, persuaded his mother to sell her portion to the same person. I mean, he got 2 shares of the property. But he wasn't interested in either. He only interested in the money that maybe he could get from the property. He wasn't interested in the history of the family or anything. Just want some money.
So I think there was like at one point in time, we would have family reunions every year. Then that converted to every 2 years to try to bring the family together so that we can have conversations about what to do and making sure that everyone knew that, you know, there was some financial responsibility to the land, pay the taxes. We tried to build a corporation, a corporation was established. Some family members signed their shares over into the corporation so that we could try to secure as much of a larger percentage of a share of the land as possible and keep it within the family. Similar to, I think it's Mr. Hill's story, you know, there absolutely would have been an interest in saying, let us purchase whatever share we believe that is rightfully owed or rightfully due or rightfully entitled for the family members. But we were in the process of just organizing or continuing to organize and bring everybody together. Because if the opportunity had been presented to us to purchase just a share of what was left, that certainly would have been an option. And that was evident by what occurred on the day of the forced sale. We had just a couple of family members that put up over $500,000 to save the land. Or to keep it in the family. So if the opportunity had been presented to the entire family, we probably would still have ownership of the land. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to share her story. and the story of our family. We may have other family members that are on the line. They may be willing to speak up a little bit later.
Thank you both so much for sharing. Mr. Wardlaw, we would like to hear from you about your experience with Heirs property.
What's she saying?
She's talking to someone else.
Mr. Wardlaw, I think you're muted. Maybe we can come back to Mr. Wardlaw. I think he might have accidentally disconnected.
Okay, we can move to Mr. Hill.
Let me make sure, Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill has had some difficulty connecting by phone. His, let me double check. And I think Mr. AJ is. One moment. Oh, we have Mr. Wardlaw back. Mr. Wardlaw, you're muted.
Yes, I'm here.
There we go. Here we go. Thank you.
Yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Well, it's an honor to be able to share our story and to hear other stories regarding land loss here in Louisiana. I've been working with my family for over 20 years. We lost our property back in the late 1990s, whereas the adjudication process started in the early 80s. But we lost a tract of about 120 acres that we was forced to go to a sheriff's sale that had been started from a process of a family member getting a loan out, using the land, his interest in the land as collateral, and the business that gave him a loan came back and forced a sheriff's sale to recoup the money that they lost. And we was in this discussion about, you know, why do the whole tract have to be put up at risk just for one person putting up their property and collateral, using their property as their interest as collateral. And then we didn't even understand that an heir could use the property as collateral. So that was another misinformation for my mother's generation and her siblings and her uncles and aunts. They just wasn't aware of that part of the law. But I recently did a interview with a reporter from NPR, thanks to Miss Adrian, and we kind of spelled out the full scope of the whole history of what we went through here in northern Louisiana. I was born and raised in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. And my parents, both my mom and my dad, reside in the same area that this property was located on. It was a big loss to us as a family because we farmed and hunted, and I mean, we used the land as a resource for our livelihood. My grandfather lived there. My grandmother lived there. A lot of our aunts and uncles, great aunts and great uncles lived there. And so I'm very excited to hear other stories and to hear some type of operation or some type of approach of how some of this land could possibly be recouped. But that's all I got right now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So I would like to begin by posing a question to each of our panelists. Much of the land and property owned by Black Southerners is heirs property. When that property is forced into judicial sale, families are not only experiencing the devastating loss of the familial property, but also the stripping of the overwhelming majority of their overall wealth. Can you speak to the impacts your family's property loss has had on you, particularly in regards to the asset loss and the familial wealth? Can start with Ms. Michelle and Ms. Trudie. I think you're muted.
Can you do the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure.
What is the impact?
Yes, the impacts on your family's property loss. What impact has that had on you, is particularly in regards to the asset loss and wealth loss?
Okay, so for us, it really is a loss of family and a loss of family connection. We used to, have family reunions on that land. It was a way for us to come back and get together and reconnect with our roots and our heritage. As mentioned, my mom and several of the cousins had started a corporation so that the heirs could put their share of their share into this corporation so that we could maintain the land within the family, which ultimately would have generated a level of wealth because we could have done something with the land. So we were in the process of organizing it. And once the land was gone, the opportunity to get together as a family is gone. So there is no family reunion right now. We have to start all over. And then the opportunity for us to say, well, we have this, and the amount of land that we lost was 420 acres of land. And this is so important to us because we have family members that are in Louisiana right now that are still sitting on another 200 and something. And then we have other family members not a part of these tracts that have land that they're also trying to hold on to. So having lost the land and then having mom have to move here, the ability for us to maintain that wealth within our own family structure it's gone and it's no longer here.
It's done now.
So mom, did you want to say anything? She said the impact of having lost the land. What is the impact of losing the asset?
I feel like the impact where we could have developed the land, put mobile homes on there. There were people that want to really reside back to Louisiana in the future had asked to come back to Louisiana. And we will have opportunity to allow them to come back with some land that we might have owned so they could return back to where they were born and raised at. But unfortunately, they didn't have the land that we had. So we would consider on helping those family members, cousins and things to come back. But we weren't able to do that because of the situation with the lake.
And Mr.
And
Warren?
all we did was it was sold for the timber. That's it, the timber.
Yep.
And I don't know how they dispersed the amount of money that went to each family member. I don't know how they came up to that decision, how much each one got. I was kind of puzzled about that.
She's gonna.
Mr. Wardlaw, the same question to you. Can you speak to the familial and wealth loss that your family experienced because of your land loss?
Yes, definitely. The wealth is the development of those property, the farming possibilities that we had. Of course, it's 120 acres. It's a lot of land. The mere selling of timbers, like Miss Trudie said, and I'm just honored to hear her story, because her story sounds like my mom's and her siblings and my grandfather, who all had crop on their land. The land was their livelihood. They raised everything, so it was an economic boom for them. But just imagine what that could be if you multiplied for this generation, what it could be for this generation. So, yeah, we lost a lot. We lost a base of our wealth, and we still went on. The younger generation, like myself, went to school, went in the military, and was able to still purchase property. But my fight is to try to reacquire back what that generation had lost, and possibly try to multiply it and develop it to help build the wealth of more of my families and my family members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. A.J. Sabine, I would like to welcome you and ask if you could share your story with us about your experiences with Heirs property.
Certainly, and thank you for having me. I apologize for being late, but to the point, as so many of us have heard today, in my family, my grandparents were farmers. They were producers of rice and soybeans and cattle and pigs, as well as poultry. And so the problem that my family faces now is that older generation who profited off of their land has now passed on, and the land is sort of in stasis, where it was once productive and able to produce an income for the entire family. There's no succession plan in place. And so now we have an executrix, because this is Louisiana, and it's like an executor, but a female. Nothing is being done with the land, and there's no plan moving forward to pass it to the next generation of my grandparents. And so what I'd like to urge panel members as well as participants is to plan early, open up a dialogue, and start doing it while that generation who once held the land, if they're able to, make a plan to move forward so that it's not subject to tax buyouts or eminent domain or anything like that.
Yeah, they outline and a 2-inch pole there.
Thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to move into a second question for our panelists. The intense pursuit of heirs property by real estate developers is often framed as an economic or market endeavor for the betterment of factories and businesses. And much of that is detached from the notion of using legal jargon and trickery to strip families of their land and their real estate wealth. How would you respond to this claim, and being on the receiving end of heirs property loss? Can you tell us more about how the effects of land loss go far beyond business and economic ventures and actually affect the person and the family? Mr. Sabine, we could begin with you and just reverse the order.
Of course. Here in Louisiana, many of these home places that has been passed down from generation may bear the remains of ancestors who were buried on that property. It's been mentioned before by other panelists that it's your heritage that is at stake when you're losing something that's been in the family for 2 generations, as is the case in my own family. Families come on land and come off. And like the other gentleman, Mr. Wardlaw, My family has 121 acres that was part of a farming enterprise, as well as some rental properties in the small town of Opelousas, Louisiana, and in a little town called Eunice, Louisiana. So you're losing more than just a pecuniary value. You're losing a heritage, memories. Your whole existence really was tied to that land, because in my family history, I can't speak for everyone else's, but we were a free people of color, and we were some of the first settlers in rural St. Landry Parish. And the fact that we've held this land in our family for so long speaks to the business acumen of my ancestors. And I think losing that heritage and that link to the land would be terrible for any family, not to mention, African American or socially disadvantaged.
Thank you. Mr. Wardlaw, can you speak to the impacts of your family's experience with heirs property land loss and how that goes beyond the business and economic portions of it?
Well, definitely in the same vein as just Sabine, here in the Bienville Parish, same thing. Our property, my great-great-grandfather came here as a slave in the early 1800s. He was born in the early 1800s. And so he was born as a slave. And for him to acquire a land grant for 120 acres was impressive. When I learned that history, I was just impressed of that. So that type of history, what it means to the family and to generations to come, meant a lot. So for us to lose that land, you're kind of losing that history and that prestige of what your family have accomplished. And then on top of that, like Brother Sabine has said as well, it was our livelihood. It was our great-great-grandmothers and grandfathers. They lived, they farmed. We had a creek on the land. We had branches on this land. So, they could live free and independent. And that's something we need to uphold and even continue to teach that today. So there is an economic component, but it's also a human component, and understanding our history and connections with one another that we lost as well. And I think it's very important for us to have these discussions, and looking forward to the steps that we can take to help remedy some of these situations. And thank you.
If I could piggyback on that, I think a thing that is also evident in heirs property and the loss of that is the loss of political power. I mean, we are taxpayers, people who have, bought into the fisc of whatever county or parish that we live. And, as Mr. Wardlaw so eloquently said, when you lose that land, you're disconnected from that community, and you may, in fact, have more of your rights erased or stolen from you if you lose what keeps you in that community. So I just wanted to add that extra point.
And let me also add and echo what Mr. Wardlaw said, that the history behind how our family acquired that land was part of the story that we were telling to, or that my mom, I keep saying we, it's part of the
Yes.
story that my mom was telling to the generations behind her. And part of that story was Thomas Jefferson Lewis was a business person. He was a businessman. He was, for him to acquire, it ended up being something like over 700 something acres of land that he acquired. And when you think about, it was in the 1800s, I believe, when he acquired this land, and slaves weren't free then. So something was going on. There was something special about Thomas Jefferson Lewis. And that was part of our history and part of our story. And so when the land is lost, we lose that story. We lose the opportunity for individuals to go back to Louisiana, which had started while my mom was there was a migration back to Louisiana of her generation. They started returning because they wanted to be in Louisiana, and that's where they wanted to retire because that was their home. So having the land, we've just often described it as stolen. It was stolen from us. It was theft. He ended up with something like, there's a number, 2% or 20%.
2%.
2% or 20%. One of those. He ended up with that much of it, and he forced to sell, and he owned it all. Therefore, no one else had the opportunity to develop the land and try to keep it and maintain it in the family. And then there's also the element of developers taking advantage, in our opinion, of the landowner's ignorance of the law or their ignorance of the process, and taking advantage of the older generation. So my mom's generation, many of them had died off. And my mom was one of the few who was working tirelessly to keep this land in the family. And she brought along several behind her that are a few generations removed from ownership of the land. And that's where we have the opportunity as family members to begin to develop and begin to build businesses with this land. It was my generation that got involved. 3 of my cousins that got involved alongside with my mother that said, you know what, we can do this. We can save this land, because now they have the technology, they have the education, they have the law degrees, they have all of the things that the developers had in order to cause this land or make this land be something besides just something that wood and weeds are growing on. So the bigger impact is that now we have a whole generation that really was ready to step up to the plate and do what our ancestors did to make it an economic part of our family history. That was stolen from us as a family, as well as the other families on this call.
We get royalty checks. We have tanks of oil sitting on the land right now. On the land with oil in the tank. So I don't know what's gonna happen to those in the future. Cause we get royalty checks and leases and all that stuff back in the day. Everybody kind of began to migrate, went away to, cause we didn't have no job, number one. So we had to leave. Okay, you understand that? We had to leave. We didn't want to, but we had to in order to be better our life, because there was no job in Louisiana for us to go to, period. And then when we get ready to retire, to come back what we thought we had, we don't have it anymore. That's the worst part about it.
The final question that I would like to pose to our panelists: for many land owners and heirs property landowners, the family's land was at one time or another considered to be inconsequential, but was then heavily sought after by a real estate developer or business person outside of the family. How does it feel to witness the land shift to valued and coveted in the name of a business opportunity? And could you speak to the price at which the land sold for, and how much you felt the land was worth in comparison to how much it was sold? Ms. Trudie and Ms. Carthen, we can start with you.
Did you hear her?
What you say?
She said, how did it feel to have the land shift from the family ownership to a developer or a business person, and how much did it sell for?
How much is it sell for?
Yeah, how did it feel to have the land shift from the family to a business developer? So you can answer that first.
How did it feel?
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking for it to happen. Cause we wasn't knowledge of what was going on. So therefore, it just plain was stolen, period. simple that. Cause we have fought hard to keep it. We paid the taxes and everything. Make sure we did all of that. Cause one time we never paid tax because we wasn't getting anything from the land. But now they passed a law where you got to pay taxes regardless to the situation where you had anything on it or not. So I left my house down there, my mother's house is there, and we have another house there. So I lost all of it.
Yeah.
And I did a whole lot of investment into that property.
And then she said, how much did it sell for?
How much was it sell for?
How much did it sell on the land sale? What did it sell? And how much did you think it was worth?
Wasn't much what we got for it, that's for sure. I hadn't had time to
Talk to them. Talking to them.
I didn't know how much was sale for. I think it was for more than what we got from it. That's for sure.
It's over $600,000.
Yeah, it was more than that. If we had the opportunity to better the way we wanted to do it, I would say
Mr. Sabine, the same question to you for your family's experiences. How did it feel to watch that land go to coveted by business people and have it sell for an amount? How much did it sell for, and how did you feel? How much was it worth compared to what it was sold for?
Well, I can't really speak to that because my family's property is still within the family. However, I can speak to the fact that the land is not being utilized for the purpose for which it was intended, which is a farm. So many of you know it's very expensive to clear land and to place infrastructure in land such as pumps and pipes to distribute water across a vast area. That's very expensive, and the infrastructure is also expensive. What I can speak to is if you have property that's still in your family, try to get entrepreneurial leases or some other kind of business venture to keep that land in production so that you can have a return on that, on your families and then your ancestors' investment. Right now, much of my property, or my family's property that is laying dormant, and it's allowed to be grown over and being taken back by nature. So my only advice to that is to make sure that you're trying to keep the land engaged with commerce.
And Mr. Wardlaw, the same question to you. What was it like to experience your family's land go to heavily sought after being seen as inconsequential at one point? And then how much did it sell for? And did you feel that it was worth what it sold for?
Yeah, I did see the amount. It was a timber company bought ours, and they paid a hefty price for it because it was forced in a sheriff's sale. And some family members got money, but again, look what we lost. And prior to that, years prior, for my grandfather's generation, there was approximately about 7 or 8 homes built on this property, the same property. So to look at it from the standpoint of what potentially it could be versus the money that we got, it could be so much more. And I have other family members on my mother's side and my other family members who lost acreage, and they was buying it pennies for $1. So, you pick up somebody's taxes for $1,200 or $2,000, and you're getting 40 acres and 50 acres. You're getting pennies for a lot of acres of land that can possibly be developed to a whole lot more. So when I first heard that amount, yeah, I was shocked. But I also know the real value of land. And that's why I've been doing what I've been doing for over 20 some years, trying to recoup it and trying to get it back into the hands of our families.
Thank you all so much for sharing with us and telling us about your stories. Jonathan, I can turn it over to you for your questions.
Hey, what's up? Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Wardlaw, this is like specific to you and also Miss Trudie. Did anyone in your family prior to the sheriff's sale being forced attempt to partition the land yourselves where you force out the new owner, the foreign owner? Mr. Wardlaw?
Not really. Not really. There was some organization, but not particularly for that reason.
Okay. Another question, Mr. Wardlaw. So one of the issues that's happening with these partitions is it goes to forced sale. Would your family have been happy with the idea of giving him giving this developer just that many acres rather than giving them the whole thing?
Absolutely. We actually got our lawyer to put that in our case, and the judge denied it. Denied that point. We argued that point. I specifically remember talking to my mom about that, and they denied that. And that would have been absolutely what we were looking for.
Can Miss Trudie hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a similar question to you all. Once the guy bought into you guys' property, was there any movement by your family to attempt to partition the land and force him out, where you guys start the process rather than they start the process?
Did anybody in the family try to partition the land and force Mr. Tuggle out before he did it?
So we weren't aware that we need to do that.
Yes. Excellent.
No, we
Excellent.
weren't aware of that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Because we had known that we would have been ready for him. Like we tried hard to be there because we had family members from all over, connected family members that they were not direct from a T.J. Lewis estate, but they were heir to the member of the T.J. Lewis family.
Yeah.
My granddad, nieces and nephews on my granddad's side of the family. They were all there to support us, but we weren't ready for it. We had the money, but we weren't ready for it to quit the sale.
Well, he's talking about before Mr. Tuggle. So she's thinking about two different things. So she's thinking about day of, we didn't get enough notice, so everybody was kind of scrambling at the last minute. But before Mr. Tuggle forced the sale, she's saying that they didn't know that that was an option.
That's right.
That as an option to force a sale and then basically take ownership of the land, which would have put the family in a greater position clearly than Mr. Tuggle was in.
And let me if I can chime in on that and say, and it's good to hear Ms. Trudie, and thank you. That generation, that elderly generation, was under the notion that heirs property meant just that. It belonged to the heirs. They didn't understand the interest or partition. They just knew that this land went to families, to other family members, and for descendants down the line. And they just had no idea about any type of partition or interest, undivided interest. Most of them didn't think of the land that way.
One more question. I'm sorry.
Then his other question to you is, would the family have been okay selling to Mr. Tuggle, just giving him the part that he owned? So he got in like 2% or 20%. Would the family have been okay just giving him that portion as opposed to the whole part?
Of course they would have. I know they would have. That's why we're fighting hard to keep it.
Thank you.
But 2%, whatever he got, for 420 acres of land. But you know, everything being developed.
Mr. Wardlaw, and so Ms. Trudie, she informed us that the thing that broke her family's land apart was a 2% interest. You said, I remember you mentioned that one of your relatives mortgaged his interest in the land. Do you know about what percentage of the land that was? What percentage of ownership? Mr. Wardlaw? Let's see. Seems Mr. Wardlaw has been disconnected. I see that we have okay, a new panelist on.
Mr. Odis Hill, are you available?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to tell,
Yes, I am.
share your story? I think it's a important side of all of this that we would all benefit from hearing.
Yes. What I'm dealing with is that I have a great grandmother's name that's still on the town. And the grandchildren and great grandchildren, they want to sell, but they can't sell due to the fact that they hadn't done a succession. And it's a lot of people involved, and it's only 10 acres involved. And the cost of the succession is going to be astronomical to pay for the succession. And they are not willing to pay for the succession. And I was just wondering, would there be any reduction in the cost of the succession by any lawyers, or could they get that succession done for a cheaper price? That's the issue that I'm dealing with. You know, it's a lot of cases where the great grandparents' name is still on the town, and it's really not a whole lot that the current generation can really do with that property. I mean, they can lease it out, but you know, you increase the number of people that's involved, and for 10 acres, you know, you're really not getting a whole lot if you got a number of people involved in that property. And I've already bought 50% of the land, and it says that it's stated that, you know, you can have a force of a sheriff's sale. But the other heir, she don't want to sell, so why would I force her to sell if she don't want to sell, you know?
Mr. Hill, I think that your perspective is a great perspective to consider here. Can you describe some of the challenges that come along with dealing with the legal nature of heirs property, successions, and titling, and how organizations and attorneys can best assist you with estate planning and funding successions?
I assume if you could reduce the cost of the succession, I will pay that succession.
And is there anything that you think organizations and attorneys could do to assist with the estate planning?
Wait for it?
Is there anything that you think attorneys and organizations can do to assist with estate planning before we get to a situation where only one person wants to sell or wants to purchase? And instead of having issues with partitions and the members who are on the title, that there's someone that could assist families with estate planning of their heirs property?
Yeah, you know, if we could find a lawyer that was willing to, reduce the cost. You know, that's the main issue, the cost by the lawyers as far as doing the succession. And I know everybody, you know, everyone is in business to make a living, you know, but that's the main reason here in Louisiana is it's going to be the cost. And there are a number of cases where the great-grandparents' name is still on the title.
I think that was a little bit of our journey. And I wasn't necessarily involved directly in the process, but my mother and those cousins that I mentioned in the introductory letter, they were. And it is a very expensive process. And I assume he's talking about identifying who all the heirs are, who the property belongs to, and what possible percentage of shares. It was very costly from what I remember. But also another point in what happened with our family is a number of the heirs had actually moved out of the state of Louisiana.
Some wasn't born in Louisiana.
Right, and some of them didn't live in Louisiana, but so their interests really weren't protected. There's supposed to be somebody in Louisiana that's supposed to identify and reach out to those individuals to make sure that they are part of the process, that their rights are protected. It didn't appear that that had happened. But the way I want to tie these two thoughts together is this. We went through the process of identifying all the heirs, and it's quite possible that that very same information could have been used to protect the rights of everybody that had a share, and that didn't happen. So if there was, let's say if there were 25 people, if there were 2 people who were willing to put up $500,000, just imagine what the other 23 people might have been able to do. Had everybody been notified properly, had their rights been protected, we could have had a better outcome in this situation. But we did go through that process of identifying all the heirs, and you're absolutely right, Mr. Hill. It is expensive, but it's also what can be used in the law to make sure that the out-of-state property owners' interests are protected.
And ma'am, I'm thinking as far as all of these heirs are all of these heirs are out of state.
Oh, wow.
It's not any of these heirs. Pay for it?
Thank you to all of our panelists who have shared with us. And I want to make sure that we're a little bit over time on our 1 hour, but I want to make sure that our guests, if there are questions, I've received a few by the chat, but if there are specific questions that you would like to ask, we'd like to invite you to do so.
So I do have a question. I'm hearing Mr. Wardlaw mention that there may be some dialogue or conversation around recouping the land. Is that a possibility? Can you share a little bit more about that? What does that mean, if I'm hearing it correctly?
So from what we tried to do, and I'm still trying to work on it. So some of the timber company, since it was forced to share sale, like I said, the price was pretty hefty. They were willing to sell back some of the land after they cut the timbers. They was willing to sell back some of the land to those who could afford it. And I'm just looking for other ways that we can possibly utilize that in some type of broader measure, because there's so many ways, like you guys are talking about, family members who don't even live in Louisiana anymore, who moved away, many migrated years ago. Their elderly parents passed away. They're not even aware of what's been going on. But if there's a way that instead of, finding a way to allow family members to purchase it back, I think that would be part of bringing justice to some of the situation. We may not be able to do it 100%, but I'm looking at it. If you're dealing with with 120 acres and you can get 80 back. I don't think that's a bad deal. You know, just try to recoup something back.
Thank you.
And the issue isn't to the exclusion of other areas that are not farmed, right? So it's about any property that you would like to, as Mr. Sabine and Mr. Wardlaw mentioned, well, Mr. Sabine mentioned that there's property that people are not doing what it should be intended for, which was farming. Similarly, it could be houses in urban areas where no one's able to take care of that anymore. So you have blight, abandonment, and vacancy. So it hits every border of our state in maybe fundamentally different ways. You know, New Orleans, we see it in disaster. Lake Charles is currently dealing with it in disaster, as is North Louisiana following tornadoes and the freeze. So if there are no additional questions from anyone, or if you would like to say a few parting words to any of our panelists, or by any of our panelists, I would invite you to do so. And if folks want to stay on and have a bit of a discussion, we're also happy to host for some additional time.
Just one more quick question. Are you able to give us an update on where Louisiana is in this process?
I would love to invite a member of the Law Institute. If you can speak to how it works. Right now, the Louisiana legislature passed House Resolution 201, directing the Law Institute to study it. Professor Lovett from Loyola Law School, I would love it if you can fill us in a little bit on that. And then Professor Mitchell at Texas A&M after Mr. Lovett.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you so much for this fantastic panel. It's been really illuminating. I've learned a lot. Briefly, I don't know exactly what the Law Institute, I'm a member of the council, but I'm not on the executive committee or in charge of any committees. But you're right that House Resolution number 201 calls on the Law Institute to study potential adoption of the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act and to otherwise address our laws on partition of ownership and individual. So I recently, I just sent to find out what their, as soon as I hear something. I imagine committee established to start working on this project, but I have not heard anything about who will be chairing that or who would be serving. I hope that's helpful.
And so when the Law Institute receives the charge to study it, and they will take until the next legislative session to make any sort of recommendations to our current process.
Yeah.
So we have about a year.
By February 1st, 2022. So that's actually not very far away. They really need to jump on the that if the Law Institute recommended something.
I think we just lost you, Professor.
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, John.
Okay.
Professor Lovett, you're cutting in and out.
What will probably happen is, maybe what would happen would be they will make an initial recommendation about whether or not they want to actually draft a proposed legislation, and that could easily come back by February, I think. Maybe, but there may be someone else on the Law Institute here on the call who can speak to this.
Maybe Professor Mitchell, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I can't talk about the Louisiana, State Law Institute specifically. I'm in Texas, not Louisiana. But the brief thing I wanted to say is I really wanted to thank all the families who shared their experiences today. It's that experience that really motivated me 25 years ago to try to do whatever I could to help disadvantaged, disproportionately African-American property owners with their property issues. And I really think that what we heard this morning paints a much more complete picture of the historical importance of land ownership, especially the African-American community, and the negative impact that the law has had in terms of leading to forced sales of folks' property under very unjust circumstances. And what I hope is that the panel today, and I want to thank Louisiana Appleseed for organizing this, kind of serves as a catalyst to put some real impetus behind moving forward with trying to reform this law in Louisiana. So, I think it's very hopeful that we actually hear these actual stories, because sometimes the narrative of how the law works in formal circles is completely disconnected from how it actually works in the lived experiences of people like we've heard from today. So I just want to kind of thank you for that. We are there. I should say we have some continuing momentum. We're on the cusp of another enactment, this time in California. We're expecting the California Senate to approve it this week. It was already approved by the California Assembly, and I've been told that the bill is going to be on the desk of the governor there in 2 to 3 weeks. We're doing great in the District of Columbia. And so we have other things, but for me, Louisiana is a top priority. And I'm just thankful that we have a group of folks here who are invested in trying to address this particular law, and then maybe we can build from there.
Thank you, Professor Mitchell, for all of your work these 25 years, which also, for those who don't know, Professor Mitchell is also a MacArthur Genius as well. So there's for this work exactly. So if there are no additional questions, maybe we can end, but otherwise, Appleseed is available at any time. We'll be putting out a full report on the issue with our esteemed volunteers from Prior Cashman, as well as from Evergreen Sutherland and MGM Law, some of whom were able to join us today. And we hope that that will also serve as a resource for the Law Institute and publicly to understand heirs property, the impact of heirs property, and the generational accumulation of wealth in low-income communities. Thank you to the Wilson Foundation and the Louisiana Bar Foundation for making this possible, and thank you for everyone for your time.
Adrian, can I put out a closing note here, please?
Absolutely.
It's really kind of heartbreaking listening to these stories, and I would have to guess that a lot of these properties were lost when the court could not find people, or they didn't know the addresses of the co-heirs, and they had a court-appointed curator who has a duty to locate these people. And I would guess that most of the time they didn't do a very good job of attempting to locate, probably ran an ad in a local paper, and that was it. And it fell on deaf ears. So one of the things I heard today, I think is a great suggestion going forward for the younger generation today. If you have family farms or farms that are owned by various members of the family, not just immediate family, transfer that property into an LLC. The cost is relatively small, and then that LLC will be the defendant in any action, and it's easier to get notice of that and defend it if and when it happens. The other issue in partition of farmland, which is a little different from urban property, is that it's more susceptible of being partitioned in kind. You take 10 acres, I take 10 acres, whereas you can't divide your residence on Main Street in New Iberia, cutting it in half. So those are just some thoughts that struck me during this conversation.
Thank you. a complete agreement. And I think with the farm property is if only the court had partitioned it in kind, which we see did not happen, even if that was the intent and was available under the law, that still was not happening. So even more to consider, not only just urban, and farmland. I welcome any other additional comments.
Ms. Wheeler, I would just like to say one more thing, very quickly. Start the conversation now. If you're on this panel and you've got kids, talk about it today. Don't wait until you're, oh, I'm gonna put it off until I get a little older, or, you know, do what you need to do to ensure that what you own, whether you're in the country or in the city, is done to your wishes, right? That means estate planning, figuring out who gets what. It's not awkward if you don't make it awkward. And that's all I want to leave everyone with.
I want to leave everybody. Thank you guys for this panel. I've learned a lot. It's great to see this organization here in my great state of Louisiana. I'm looking forward to doing a lot of more grassroots efforts in this area with a lot of you guys. I think we can get something accomplished. Definitely piggybacking on what Mr. Sabine just said. I did a complete genealogy by approaching this. I had to do a genealogy of my family. And so that took me to another realm, but I'm glad I did it. And now I'm able to talk with other family members, with my family members and my cousins and my brothers and sisters. And we are much more informed than we ever were. We're looking to be a little bit more active. Like I said, try to recruit what we kind of lost. And then moving forward, we want to be back. And, you know, I think it helps. I think it helps the state. I think, if you got more income and revenue being generated from this process, I think it helps the state. I think it could be a win-win. And, but I'm appreciative of being here. Thank you so much, Adrian. And just looking forward to hearing the follow-up and continue work with the rest of you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Wardlaw. Okay. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and I look forward to following up with each of you in sundry contexts on this work. So this is but the first step toward next legislative session.
Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you, Ms. Carthen and Ms. Trudie.
Thank you, guys. Take care, Ms. Trudie. Thank you.
He said, take care.
Okay.